I'll call this meeting of the House Committee on Veteran Services and Emergency Preparedness together for Thursday, March 12th. So we have 4 bills today for public hearings. And so what I'm going to do is open 2 of the public hearings for House Bill 2818 and House Bill 3189 to allow Senator Hansel to provide his testimony, because he probably has other important matters he needs to be dealing with in the Senate. And then after that point, after he's delivered his testimony, we'll go back and we'll just start with 2118 and proceed through from there. So I'll now open the hearing for House Bill 2818 and House Bill 3189. Senator Hansel, please.
Mr. Chair, does this give us an opportunity to grill a senator?
I think it does.
It's going to be a good day.
Thank you, Chair Lively, and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Senator Bill Hansel, representing District 29 in Eastern Oregon. And it's one of those things that's kind of interesting, because my rural firefighters and folks came to me with some needs, and we ended up putting together a couple of bills. And I later found out that Representative Boone had either last session or this session introduced the same legislation on the House side. So I guess great minds think alike. I'm not sure. So we're here kind of, I'm talking on both of them. I'll do House Bill 3189 first.
Okay.
But what it does is to allow for tax credits for volunteer firefighters. This bill has been introduced many times, however, it's never gone or passed out of committee, as I understand. But I'm hopeful this year we can finally do something to help the very important volunteer firefighters of Oregon. Outside the Portland metro area and other big cities like Eugene and Salem, many communities rely on the services provided by volunteer firefighters for solving some of their fire issues, obviously. This is not just an Eastern Oregon issue or coastal region issue, but it's an issue that affects many communities around Oregon. In 2013, there were around 8,300 volunteer firefighters across the state. Volunteer firefighting efforts are critical to rural Oregon, and this legislation seeks to provide an incentive to retain those who are needed, necessary, and are very hardworking. By allowing the incentive in the form of a tax credit, we can help keep the volunteers involved in the community. As Grant Darrow from the Elgin Rural Fire District stated in an email to me, a young volunteer firefighter with a job and family is finding it difficult, if not impossible, to juggle the time requirements by work, family, and children and their associated activities with the increasing demand by the state for more training. The first thing to fall by the wayside is their desire to serve the community in this way. In the real world economics, they are being asked to cough up hundreds of dollars each time, each month, and then put out the firefighters, or put out the fires for nothing. These rural areas are having difficulty recruiting and retaining the volunteers for the fire station, and as such, the volunteers are leaving their important positions. I spoke with Mr. Darrow on the phone yesterday. He made a few phone calls and lined up the fire chiefs from Union County, Island City, Baker County, Haines, Umatilla, and other parts of the state to be able to come in and to testify, and or in just a few short phone, but because of the distance and whatnot, they've not been able to come. This will incentivize and help us retain these very important people, and I would urge your support of House Bill 3189.
Thank you.
Be happy to answer any questions on that particular.
Any questions for the senator? We're going to let him off easy.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I've seen this movie quite a few times before. I don't understand. I thought we'd pass it out of the House.
No, see.
We're on the 7th iteration.
It feels like it has, so maybe it's on the other side. Okay.
Like I want it word for word, and I don't even have to read it.
I know. Good.
$250.
Yeah.
And then House Bill 1, if I'm...
Sure, no, go right ahead.
Okay,
Thank you.
Again, members of the committee, for the record, I'm Senator Bill Hansel, representing Senate District 29. I have an identical Senate Bill 127, which I will not move at all if this particular one moves. But House Bill 2818 adds the Volunteer Firefighters Association to the entities eligible for individual income tax contribution checkoff list. In order to qualify for the instruction listing, the entity must apply and meet the qualifications as described in ORS 305725. Rural incentives, I think, are needed here. This is another way to do that, particularly in rural Oregon. They're very critical in rural Oregon and for the reasons I've stated before. And this legislation seeks to provide an incentive to retain these very needed and necessary volunteers. Again, I'd be happy to answer any questions concerning HB 2818.
Okay. Representative Evans?
Yes, Chair Lively, Senator Hansel, I had just a brief question on this. I love the bill, want to support it, will support it. On the tax credit discussion or on compensation discussion, I know that there's been some recent federal policy changes in terms of how volunteers could be even given little bits to take their spouses out to dinner and other things. Has there been any discussion as maybe a follow-on conversation having to do with the increasing amount of time it takes to stay qualified? I know that standards for training have continued to go up, and that's a major problem for volunteers, at least it was when I was a volunteer firefighter. And in addition to the baseline of if you keep up the minimum number of hours, tax credit, but perhaps some incentives in there for folks that go for advanced training or keep even more current? Probably asking that poorly, but that's...
This is trying to get at that. I don't know the specifics of how far it goes, but maybe some of the folks that are here that would be better able to answer that question. But the whole idea is that we are absolutely dependent on rural firefighters in virtually every community in my district.
Yes, sir.
And throughout rural Oregon, we're not recruiting them like we need to or retaining them because and some incentives, we're trying to figure out how to do that.
Okay.
Certainly, Representative Boone.
Thank you, Mr. I almost said Mr. Speaker. I do this. Elevate you a little bit.
Well, thank you.
So, Senator Hansel, Mr. President, thank you very much for testifying in favor of these bills. And I'll try to address Representative Evans a little bit too, but I wanted to also double up on what you said about the increased requirements by the state for training and all kinds of, they're just things that cost money, take time, et cetera. And it's like you could be training and doing all that stuff, and there's drills, and there's calls, and you could be, and you're on call 24/7, and so it is difficult, especially in rural areas, and that it often becomes a choice between whether to answer the call or stay home with your family or whatever. But as far as the incentives, additionally, like in my fire department, we do have a very small tax base in our community. So, and what we did it because it ended up lowering people's fire insurance rates, and if you meet a certain level and stuff. So it ended up the actual cost of their tax base or whatever it's called, the levy, cost them less than. They saved quite a bit more, including that, in their fire insurance premiums. And then for training and stuff, we take money out of that we get and pay for the books and the classes if they need it. But people are on their own for fuel, and that has been really hard. especially for you guys in the really big rural areas that drive a long ways, and the gas was $4 a gallon. But it's, when a call is an hour away or whatever, and your closest people, you don't know. The big district, these guys are going to get there sooner than these guys. Mm-hmm. And you never know where the ambulance is going to show up. So it's a lot of additional help.
If I could say, I think this is a great beginning. I hope that we can revisit it in the future about some of the other and other incentives in addition.
We have tried. This is for 2818. This is the 7th try, and
7 times would be the charm.
Yeah, Genoa's been there all the way. Some of the usual suspects in the room too. And so anyway, it's great to have a couple more bills doing a little bit different. One's the checkoff, one's a tax credit, and one's another thing. But I really appreciate your support, and it takes the whole state, to do this. So this is great. And thank you, Mr. Speaker, Chair, whatever you want to be called today, for letting us do these today.
Chair Lively, if I may say, I do hope that in future we can come back and add to it. That means it passed out of this one, so that's I hope for that. Right. But I would say, in conclusion, the last thing we would want anywhere in the state for someone to call 911 on a fire and no one show up.
Yeah, you bet.
This will help.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for taking the time to come over and testify.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate
Certainly.
it.
We'll be there when it goes to that other side, too.
Yeah. So, since the chair didn't start the meeting off quite correctly, we'll now have the, this being
Hear
chair,
what
maybe
the
I
bill's
could
about?
call me something else. Maybe that would be better and I would do this. But maybe we could have the administrator read what these measures are next, since that should have been first, and then we'll proceed from there.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, House Bill 2818 adds Oregon Volunteer Firefighters Association to the list of entities eligible for the individual income tax return checkoff contribution. May have a fiscal or revenue impact statement. Neither both are issued, and it has a subsequent referral to the House Committee on Revenue.
Thank
House
you.
Bill 3189 grants income tax credits for services to fire departments or rural fire protection districts provided by volunteer firefighters as specified. Again, may have fiscal or revenue impact, no statement issued, and it also has a subsequent referral to the House Committee on Revenue.
Okay, thank you. And for everybody's knowledge, there are quite a few pieces of testimony in that on OLIS. And I would also let you know that Grant Darrow, who the senator referred to earlier from Elgin, later we'll be calling him so he can provide some voice testimony on behalf of 3189.
Cool. All right.
So are we all on the same page now? I am, so. Sure. Okay, so now we're going back to 2818, and we have,
Two together, Genoa and David.
okay, so Genoa and David Ingram and David
Sellers.
Okay, Sellers. I'll go with it. Well, but you didn't waste any space, and I appreciate that. So, please identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I am Genoa Ingram. I represent the Oregon Fire District Directors Association and the Oregon Volunteer Firefighters Association. I have both of my bosses in the room today, so I will be on my best behavior. First, to talk about need. Ever since I've been working for the fire service, the theme has been the need for attraction and retention of volunteer firefighters. It was so great that it's been about 11 years ago now that FEMA put out a book about how to attract and retain volunteer firefighters. The problem in Oregon is that most of the suggestions put forward in their manual were illegal due to the ethics laws. You may or may not know that Oregon volunteer firefighters are subject to the same ethics standards as any other elected public official. So some of the things like, I think Colorado gave free cable and things of that nature are prohibited because of our ethics laws here. The Oregon Volunteer Firefighters Association did try to establish their own incentive program. They had a fund. They used to have a fund for hardships for volunteer firefighters. If there was a death or if someone were injured, they would usually provide $1,000 to hold them over until either the DPSST money came through or just to help the family with expenses. It also went for scholarship training, and so we work hand in hand with DPSST at our conferences. And I want to tell you about our firefighter conferences, and Mr. Chair, I promise I'll just be as brief as I can, but this is my passion. Volunteer firefighters are my passion. So when you go to a volunteer firefighter conference, you don't sit at a table and get lectured to like at most conferences of the associations I manage. They have things like vehicle extrication and rope rescue and water rescue and high angle rescue, and they're out there learning how to be most effective in the event of an accident or a tragedy. And so we work hand in hand with DPSST to provide that training. They either send instructors, DPSST instructors, or DPSST will give us a grant to hire our own instructors. So it's top-notch training to help our volunteer firefighters do the best job that they can. The problem is with that fund, the training fund and the death and hardship fund, it has been completely depleted. The need was just greater than what was coming in. We have zeroed out that account. We have closed the bank account. There is no account at this time. About 7 years ago, Representative Boone has a very good memory, we were discussing ways to help the volunteer firefighters in a legal way, in a manner that would not go against the ethics laws. And we thought it would be a great idea. There was the tax checkoff for the arts. There was various checkoff programs. And I thought, well, I think I'm going to fill out an application for the Oregon Volunteer Firefighters to be part of that tax checkoff program. And I looked at the statute, and lo and behold, it said that you have to collect 10,000 signatures. And I thought, well, that's not a problem. These guys have more energy than anything. But you also have to have banked $1 million the previous year. And I went back to them and I said, if we had banked $1 million last year, we wouldn't need this bill. And I understand the thought behind it. I understand that they want to make sure you're a legitimate organization. But these guys are well, maybe he's not. Most of them,
That's your boss
are
next
as legitimate as they come. And I can verify that the Volunteer Firefighters Association does very good things. They support the Burn Center. Dave is in fact, I believe he's on the advisory board for the Burn Center. We contribute to that. When we can, we have an auction every year, and that money goes to support the Burn Center. So what this bill does, and I want to make it very, very clear, because there have been some misunderstandings throughout the many years that I've been doing this, it does not automatically put the volunteers on that tax checkoff program. It simply removes that obstacle to have that $1 million requirement. And as you can see, I attached a copy of the bill to my testimony, and there are several other organizations, the Alzheimer's Association, the Veterans Home, et cetera. And we just want to be included in there. We think it's an important, viable organization that should not have to be required to show that they are a legitimate organization by having that $1 million. So, a little bit of history. I'm going to give you a history lesson. I went to work for the volunteer firefighters in 2007. They came and knocked on my door one night while I was working late, and they said, will you take us? And I said, absolutely. I had lost a home to a fire. They were the guys who showed up. And I have always made a promise to myself that if I could help the fire service in any way, I would do so. And it's just something, as you can probably tell, I'm very, very passionate about. If you talk to me, you don't probably get 10 words without me saying volunteer firefighter somewhere in the conversation. In 2008, we talked about, as you said, funding, and in 2009, I brought forward House Bill 3414, which was the very first tax checkoff bill. It was identical to the bill that's before you today. That bill passed the House unanimously on Thursday, June 25th. It was, I think, the first day of your conference. And I was told them that I couldn't go to the conference because I wanted to make sure the bill got a hearing on the other side. The problem was we were so late in the session, the bill was just held up till the very last, that there just wasn't time to hear it. So we came back 2 years later in 2011 with House Bill 2564. It had a hearing in the House Revenue Committee on February 16th and was never heard from again. There was no work session, there was no subsequent hearing, there was nothing. Then, in 2013, there was Senate Bill 128. It passed the Senate unanimously on May 22nd, 2013. So there's a little trend here. Each chamber has passed identical bills unanimously, but I've been around 35 years, and even I know that they have to pass both chambers in the same session, and that hasn't happened yet. So here we are back with 2818. And here's where it gets not so fun. If this bill goes to the House Revenue Committee, I believe it will die. I believe it will die. I know that there are members of the Revenue Committee who do not like the tax checkoff program. I understand that. But until it goes away, I'd like an opportunity for the volunteer firefighters to have their shot at being there. I'm asking, because there is no revenue impact, and it's been shown time and time and time again, that there is no revenue impact. The Department of Revenue has testified in previous sessions that there is no negative impact on the Department of Revenue. There is no negative impact on anyone. This is one way, and if we sound a little discouraged about why we don't have, why we're not asking for more, I'm thinking if we can't even get this, if we can't get this, why bother? This is a way to provide incentives, death benefits, and training for volunteer firefighters that does not cost the general fund a penny. It does not cost the taxpayers a penny unless they choose to contribute. So I have very thoughtfully crafted a little letter to the Speaker asking for the subsequent referral to be rescinded. I have a master copy. Some of you approached me about signing on to that letter. If you would care to do that, I do have a copy on me. And then the last thing I will say is also attached to my testimony, and you're probably wondering why. Also back in 2009, there was a bill, 2420, that was a cancer presumption bill for paid firefighters. And the council came to us and they said, would you put your name on the bill as a requester, even though you're not included? Well, being who they are, the volunteers support all public safety entities in the fire service. They fight fires side by side many times with paid, and they said, absolutely, we will put our names on that. And at the time, the council said, you know, in return, if there's something down the road that you want, we'll help you get it if it's reasonable. We think this is reasonable. So Kelly Bach and Bob Livingston, if you're out there, this is all we want. This is all we're asking for. We believe it's reasonable. It doesn't damage any entities, and it doesn't cost the taxpayers anything. And it makes certain that the volunteers who may be fighting right beside you, your members of the council, are well trained. So I'm prepared to respond to any questions. David's here to respond to questions. I don't know what else to say about this bill. It's a fabulous bill, and we urge, please don't send it to revenue because it will die.
Representative Boone.
The end.
Thank you, Mr.
Yes,
Chair.
thank you.
I just wanted to add one little thing to your testimony, Genoa, and that is to say, and you did a beautiful job, the fact that it is a check off, it means that when I get my tax return, I can give it to this group. And that's how it doesn't cost the state anything. It's a choice thing. Nobody makes you, but other people can. I can't tell you how many times we get a little thank you card. I guess you guys might have seen those in your departments. You get a thank you card from someone who rolled over on the highway and you saved them, or they had a fire or whatever, and they'll send a check. You know, they'll send a, I don't know, $100, $50 or something. This will give them another place to put it, you know, if they would like to do that, or hopefully a bigger amount in that sense. But we get that all the time. What can we do to help? Who can we send this to? And our department uses it to defray costs mostly for training and stuff. But every once in a while, like on a big fire we just had, the pumper kind of quit, and not a good thing when it's a big house.
Not very good.
But, you know, these are the kinds of expenses you don't budget for. I mean, you have a budget, but it's always really skinny. And the people maybe get hurt. Somebody gets burned, has to go to the doctor. Somebody has a problem, God forbid, is killed. But it happens, or they're laid off work for that time, or not laid off, but off work because they're injured. And that helps them defray their family costs. So that's another reason for it. But thank you. You did a really good job explaining it.
Representative Escobar?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Certainly.
You had mentioned you had an account before and you shut it down. Where did the money come from in that account?
That's a good question. It was before my time. I know that the Volunteer Firefighters Association used to also do telemarketing, and they may have just had a budget item that they put. Jim Ader used to be president. Do you know? Did it come from telemarketing? Yeah. It did. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. My apologies. It did come from their telemarketing. It was a line item budget. We don't do telemarketing anymore. They haven't since I've been with them. We rely specifically just dues and any contribution that may come our way.
Great.
Well,
Certainly, go
Mr. Chair, a lot of us in here have been involved with the checkoff system in the past, and I don't understand why it would go to revenue, because there's no revenue involved here. There's not a increase or a decrease in revenue, and the only thing it can possibly do, because it's monies that you volunteer to give, but it wouldn't be to the state of Oregon, it'd be to them. So I'm kind of confused on why it would be.
Well, that's a good question. We'll be pursuing that question.
Maybe
Try to
she has an
understand
answer.
Well, I think I might.
What's in the parish?
Thank you. So the only thing I can think of, and maybe we need to pull somebody in from the Department of Revenue, is the administrative cost of sending that money back. because there shouldn't be a cost. But they could come up and put up a little red flag that says, well, it's going to cost us, $10,000 to add it all up and send them a check, and therefore there's a fiscal. I just want to say and put on the record that I think when there are things like this in existing programs that we already do, where you check the box and you can give your money back, that there shouldn't be. I mean, for goodness sakes, we pay these people at the Department of Revenue with taxpayer dollars. They should absorb it and make it part of their day, because that's what we're tasking them to do. And when the agency comes and says, well, we got this little fiscal, and then that is the roadblock from getting good public policy done, I have a real problem with that. But so I think that that's maybe where the fiscal comes from. But I think that if this committee would write a letter to the speaker and say, we would like we think we would like to hear from DOR, but we certainly think that this should be something that is part of their day, and that they should be able to figure out how to add this up really quick and cut a check to whoever needs to get the money. That doesn't seem like it's a whole lot of time in somebody's day. So, and I think if we all maybe joined hands, if this is a priority of this committee, we should ask for the subsequent referral to revenue to be lifted this time.
Sal, we're joining hands.
Oh, not literally, okay.
Oh, yeah.
If you'd like to hold hands literally, I've got a little bit of a cold this week, but I'm happy to share my germs with Debbie.
Share my germs with me, your germs.
Because Jody Hack shared them with me.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Oh.
right, she's here sitting here, so.
So there is a procedure, obviously, for asking the subsequent referral to be removed, and I'm more than willing to fill out the
Yes.
paperwork and ask that to be done and have that conversation. So, but go ahead,
Mr.
Representative
Chair,
Roosevelt.
it used to be, I don't know when we changed this, but it used to be if you had a fiscal of under $50,000, it wouldn't have to go anywhere. Wouldn't even have to go to Ways and Means.
There's
I don't know
still
what's changed
some
this,
criteria
but-
there about the amount, and it's a little unclear what the amount is. What
And
we
if
got
this
caught
thing,
in the last one, so.
if the Department of Revenue says it's going to cost $50,000, we have a problem here someplace.
That's right, bingo.
Okay. Do you have something else?
Just to add on to what Rep. Parrish just said, and I think she's absolutely right, the system's already set to go. This just adds this organization to a list of places you can check off on your tax form to have your refund go. So I think it's already done, and like she said, just add it up. And
We'll volunteer to lift the one envelope when
Thank
they
you.
cut the check.
Then what's the problem, is what I have to say. So, David, would you like to provide testimony?
David Sellers. I've been a volunteer for 27 years and a past president of the OVFA. I think to answer part of your question, we used to do conferences with 200 to 300 people. And so there was donations that were given, as well as we were able to make a little bit more off of our conferences. We've always kept our conferences as cheap as possible to get more volunteers to come get this extensive training. But we were able to fulfill those funds because of the sheer numbers, which goes back to the retention of volunteers. We're struggling more and more to keep people volunteers. We were at our banquet this last week. We recognized a gentleman that's been a volunteer for 55 years. Okay, so the older generation gives their time. The younger generation, they're pulled way more places. We still can retain some. We still get them. We get them involved. A lot of those guys are working to become career firefighters. And if we as volunteers with the OVFA can train them to be professional firefighters, whether they're volunteer or career, that's what we're going to strive to do. So that's where some of the funding came from before. We've done our telemarketing. We know that there are people out there that will give to the volunteers. The last person that we were able to use the last of our money from our program was to the gal that got hit on 84 on her bicycle that was a volunteer firefighter. We used whatever was left to give to the department to reimburse them for some of the costs they had right at the beginning, right after the incident happened. These are the kind of things that we want to continue to do as the OVFA, as well as continue to provide this training that is more and more and more. Our new EMT rules have just gone up to where we're asking our people to do more and more and more. So if there's any way that we can get out to our people, get out to the citizens of Oregon and say, help OVFA provide some of these benefits we've had, this is something we felt was an easy way to do it without giving some of their money away to somebody else like we have to do with telemarketing.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions of David? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So not to confuse things more, but since we have two bills we're considering and Representative Hack is here, I'm going to provide her an opportunity to provide her input, testimony. And it's also, testimony is also on the list, referring to House Bill 3189, Representative Hack.
Okay. So is that the one you're talking about right now?
Well, we opened the hearing on both of them because Senator Hansel was here early, so
okay.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate that. What a great group. This would be a fun committee to be on.
You think it is, yes, thank you.
Chair Lively and members of the committee, for the record, my name is Jody Hack, and I'm the representative for House District 19, which includes parts of South Salem, Almsville, and Turner. And I am here on behalf of House Bill 3189. This is a very simple and straightforward bill. If passed, House Bill 3189 would grant a $250 income tax credit to volunteer firefighters who have performed 100 hours of volunteer service. That is at least 100 hours where these brave men and women who have risked their lives for the safety of others. With no financial incentive, these men and women willingly contribute their time, efforts, and sometimes their very lives, and they need to be recognized for it. Without volunteer firefighters, rural fire districts would be unable to operate. Oftentimes, volunteers make up the majority of rural fire departments, staff, and without them, the department would fall apart and repercussions would be catastrophic. Oregonians need to show our volunteer firefighters that we are thankful for their service. Members of the committee, this bill provides a small tax credit to volunteer firefighters, which in my mind is the very least we can do for these volunteers who put their lives on the line for our safety and well-being without regard for their own. I believe that the Bible says it best by saying, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." And how much more of a sacrifice is that to lay down one's life for a stranger? These selfless volunteers deserve to be recognized and rewarded. Offering a tax credit is a small, tangible way that Oregonians can say, thank you. Chair Lively, members of the committee, I implore you to support this bill as you keep in mind the valiant efforts and sacrifices of these volunteers who have risked their lives to protect us, our families, and communities. Thank you for your time and your consideration.
Any questions for Representative Hack?
Just a comment, Mr. Chair.
Certainly, go ahead, Representative Huffman.
Representative Hack, there's a long waiting list of representatives that want to be on this committee because there's no other committee that has bipartisan handholding, and we are always in unanimity.
Just don't start singing Kumar.
I'm with my friends here.
And that's part of what Ralph loves about us so much.
I want to come, well, I don't have committee during this time. I could just come hang out.
Okay, you could.
Got chairs. We have extra
Room
chairs.
right here. Extra chairs.
I think I might do that.
You're welcome.
Any other comments or questions for Representative Hack? Thank you for sponsoring this bill and for coming and testifying.
Well, thank you for allowing me to do that. I appreciate it very much.
Certainly. Okay, so we have two more people who have signed up to testify on House Bill 2818. Mark Kreutzer, and Ralph Groner. For the record, just state your name, please, and then offer your testimony.
We haven't had Ralph yet this year.
No.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Mark Kreutzer. I am the president of the Oregon Fire District Directors Association, or OFDDA. OFDDA was formed in 1950 and serves for elected public officials of over 200 fire protection districts throughout Oregon. All special districts were formed under ORS 478. The 5-member governing boards are responsible for the financial and management oversight of the districts. They serve without compensation. The attraction and retention of volunteer firefighters has been a top priority for the fire service both in Oregon and across the United States for a number of years. As was stated earlier by Genoa, FEMA has published booklets on how to attract and retain volunteers, and governors have formed task forces to study the issues. OFDDA believes that House Bill 2818, which removes a major obstacle to OVFA's ability to receive donations via the tax checkoff program, and House Bill 3189, which provides a $250 tax credit to volunteer first responders, represents a small step forward in assisting the volunteers. For small rural fire protection districts in particular, volunteers are the lifeblood of their communities and often the first responders to fires, traffic accidents, and other potential tragedies. Another reason we support House Bill 3189 is it's very difficult for fire districts to compensate their volunteer firefighters without running amok between the IRS, Bureau of Labor, and even PERS. So anything that we can do to give them some support and let them know how much we appreciate the job that they do is greatly appreciated. As the number of volunteers dwindle at an alarming level, it's up to us as the elected officials to make policy decisions that will provide incentives and increase training. House Bill 2818 and House Bill 3189 both accomplish this objective. On behalf of the elected officials of Oregon's rural fire protection districts, we urge your support of House Bill 2818 and House Bill 3189, and we thank you for your hearing our testimony.
Thank you very much. Any questions? No. Ralph?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, distinguished. Don't make me laugh.
Here we go.
I warned you, Mr. Chair. I warned you.
Members of the committee. For the record, my name is Ralph Groner, and I'm here to support both bills myself, but let me tell you that it doesn't come easy. I grew up in West Lynn in Sunset, and our fire hall was at that time probably permanent now. We had a volunteer fire district in West Lynn that saved our house in Sunset and the 5 children. And from that day on, I've really been very thankful. So it isn't just rural outside West Lynn. At that time was volunteer. I would also like to say I do represent, however, the state fire marshal, and I've had that for, 30 years. I also represent Board of Police Standards and Training, and I've had that forever. I have to say that I used to bother the BPST to say, why don't you get your mobile, if I say that wrong, because mobile, if you're from Alabama, if you're me, mobile.
Thank you.
Mobile training out to these rural areas so it doesn't cost them so doggone much money to come all the way into Salem, Oregon for training. And I bugged those folks long and hard. So I have had some thank you, by the way, to those of you who volunteer. Debbie used to tell me every story, and I get tears in my eyes about the amount of people they've saved. She's been a volunteer. You've been a volunteer. How many others up there want to just have been volunteers? Several of you have been. And so in my lonely, isolated support, I really have fought myself hard for volunteer firefighters, even though I live in a big city of Oregon City. But I have to say this, there are 2/3, as you were mentioned by the senator, 2/3 of our firefighters, if I'm off, Debbie, make sure I get it correct, are volunteers in this state. They have busted their fanny away from ball games, away from social events. They might have a square dance. I don't care. I love that stuff. They have had to pay their own money to come in for training. Now, we worked hard to make sure, like Aurora's here, they have their own in-house certification. That's one solution, if you can do that. The second is we need more mobile training out to the world, but that doesn't solve it. The tax credit, pardon the way I talk, I'm a union guy, is peanuts compared to the volunteer hours. These folks, if we can afford it, I can say we can't afford not to. We've got, if I had my way, it'd be more than $200 for these folks. They saved my family's life, and quite frankly, they're saving a lot of lives throughout this state. And they're also taking time away from their money. You already heard they spend their own money. My goodness, $200 doesn't come anywhere near repaying the people who do what they do. So wholeheartedly, please help. And my name is on the record for many years supporting volunteer firefighter efforts. And I'm here to answer, except for John, any questions. Thank you.
Representative Boone.
I just want to thank you, Mr. Speaker, Chair. And thank you, Ralph, and thank you. Mark, sorry. One thing that hasn't been mentioned today, but I think especially those firefighters in the rural areas, is that they also do wildland fire, and that's a big deal. And we also, in our area, we do a lot of logging country rescues, et cetera, and high angle rescue, water rescue, stuff, really, really risky stuff. And here's where you get me wrong now. I don't know. I think that if I did the math in our department, I can't speak for all departments, but I don't think it's rare. The average age of our firefighters is around 55. And we have, if you have any 10 people and you've got a couple of young ones, but on any given call, you'll have 5 60-year-olds, a couple are in their 70s. Hard to believe, but they are out there and they're doing it. So it's a, this is an interesting phenomenon. And so anyway, and then those people, of course, are usually retired, but and have maybe more time. But the fire, wildland fire this year could very well be very, very bad. And I'm worried. I have trees and no back way out. So thank you for coming, Ralph, and coming forward. And thank you for doing everything that you do. So
Thank you.
Representative Evans, did you have a question or comment?
I do, yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And for the folks at the dais, as well as other folks in the room, including the newest ex officio member of the committee, Representative Hack. One of the fundamental problems I think that everybody knows and sometimes talks about and sometimes walks around is that there's a professional and a healthy rivalry sometimes between the career and the volunteer guys and gals. And one of the things I would ask of the folks in the room, I think long term, if we can come to, through a work group process, perhaps during the interim, a discussion about what could be the possible ratio levels to where the career folks and the volunteer guys and gals could both support growth and training for both sides of that relationship, because we have a state that in some areas full-time career makes a lot of sense, and in some places it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And finding a way that we can sustain the profession and at the same time still protect people, that it's one voice from the public safety side of the house. I would really like to encourage that and ask the folks in the room that as we move forward in an era of constraints, that we find a way to get to that agreed upon ratio level, so that years in the future we don't have some of the fighting that I've seen here several sessions back about compensation, because at the end of the day they're mutually supportive efforts, and I think sometimes we let the rules get in the way of working together like we do on a fire scene. So just a request for a potential work group on that issue, having to do with ratios and compensation packages, so that we can keep that experience in the pipeline.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative Huffman, do you have any questions for the Honorable Ralph Cronin?
Not for Ralph. I am keeping tally, though. So far, Mr. Speaker, every hearing that we've had this week, the good Representative Evans has suggested a work group.
I noticed that.
Okay.
We don't want to get bored, sir.
Okay. Thank you both for testifying. So we have one more person that's signed up to speak on House Bill 3189. That's John, is it Clore? And I don't know, Geneva, did you want to come back and say anything more about this bill, the 3189?
Yes.
Okay. Because you were on here too, and I wasn't sure if we covered that or not.
This one in the middle. Is that-
We're going to do that.
Oh, okay.
Welcome.
Thank you. Chair Lively, members of the committee, my name is John Clore, and I'm a volunteer firefighter with the Aurora Fire District. I'm here on behalf of the District 63 Firefighters Association to support House Bill 3189. I'd like to read a letter approved by the District 63 firefighters, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions. On behalf of the District 63 Firefighters Corporation, we would like to express our support for House Bill 3189, which grants income tax credit to firefighters who provide volunteer services to rural fire protection districts or fire departments. The District 63 Firefighters Corporation represents 42 volunteer firefighters and EMT personnel responsible for providing fire protection and emergency medical services to the approximately 6,000 residents of the Aurora Fire District. Located in the Willamette Valley, our 64 square mile service area includes the cities of Aurora and Donald, the North Marion School District, 91 School, the Aurora State Airport, Leonard Air Park, the Boones Ferry Marina, and a 12-mile stretch of Interstate 5. We also serve unincorporated areas in Clackamas and Marion counties. In 2014, the Aurora Fire District responded to 703 calls for service. The bulk of our coverage is staffed by volunteers that respond at all times of the day and night, 7 days a week. In rural and underserved communities such as ours, volunteer firefighters play a pivotal role in providing for the safety and welfare of our fellow citizens. In recent years, many rural fire districts and departments across Oregon have struggled with volunteer recruitment and retention. Rural Oregon's aging population, rural flight into more urbanized areas, the sporadic hours, and often dangerous working conditions experienced by firefighters are all contributing factors to this decline in volunteer participation. We believe that House Bill 3189 will help not only the Aurora Fire District, but rural fire districts and departments across Oregon with their volunteer recruitment and retention efforts. While by no means a silver bullet, House Bill 3189 will create an additional incentive to help rural fire districts and departments ensure that we can continue to provide fire protection and emergency medical services to residents throughout rural Oregon. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, again for the record, Genoa Ingram, just in closing, the case has already been made, I believe. I was just, it was my error earlier that I didn't take the time to thank Representative Boone, Representative Jody Hack, and each one of you who met with me about these bills. I appreciate the time you took to meet with me and discuss this issue. Just thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Mr. Chair, I just have so many for Mr. Clore.
Wondering, fire away, Representative.
Wondering if the uniform had anything to do with catching Rachel, his wife, or
oh, I see. Here we go.
Is the badge plastic or is it real? And is he authorized? Good to see you, John.
You as well, Representative.
I guess that was appropriate. I don't know.
And I'm sorry to be so chatty Cathy today, but I just want to thank everybody who took the time to come out today for this, and the fact that we had 3 bills on these things. And Jody, you're new, and thank you so much. Thanks to Genoa for sticking with us. And I don't see Molly in the room, but I see her mom. And so, but if you put a few spots on her, she could have been the fire dog. Right. Yeah, I was hoping she'd come in with black spots. But anyway, I really appreciate you guys taking your time out of work and your day to come in here. Thank you.
So we have one more person to hear from on this bill, and it's a Grant Darrow from Elgin Rural Fire District. And so before we place a call, I just need to divulge a conflict. Having been raised in Willow, Elgin was our arch competitor, and he beat us most of the time, unfortunately. But nonetheless, I won't hold that against Mr. Darrow when he testifies. So we're going to stand at ease for a second until we can set up the phone, so he can testify, and then we'll come back.
So noted.
Okay, I'll call the public hearing back to, or this session back to order, and we're hearing testimony on House Bill 3189. So, Mr. Darrow?
Yes, Chairman Lively and committee members, my name is Grant Darrow. I'm sitting on our customer's front porch in Union right now. I'm a board member of the Elgin Rural Fire District, where I've served in that position for 8 years. And in the line of my work, I cover 9,000 square miles up here with 14 rural fire departments. One of the things that's been parked on our agenda permanently under old business is recruiting and retaining firefighters. Back in the late 70s and early 80s, we actually had a waiting list. And today, we like to see in Elgin 23 firefighters on our roster. We're lucky if we can maintain 12, with maybe 9 being active. If it wasn't for the mutual aid agreements between all the rural districts in Union, Baker, and Wallowa counties, some of our departments would be in a world of hurt. We have tried any number of things. Recruiting, we can generally get people to come on board, but once we get them on there, retaining them is a problem, and in part it's because of the increasing number of hours of training that they are required to take. Gone are the days when the fire broke out, everybody showed up and put it out. You cannot have untrained firefighters on a fire anymore. And this legislation, this bill, I think is really going to give us all a tool to help retain some of these young firefighters as they juggle their work, their families, their kids, and everything else, because time is money. And that's usually the first thing they say, I don't have time for this training. So I really encourage this bill, and I've talked to the county fire chiefs for Umatilla, Wallowa, Union, and Baker counties, and they're all on board with this. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Darrow? We appreciate your taking the time. We do have your written testimony on record, too, so that's a file.
Okay.
But we do appreciate your taking the time. And, Mr. Darrow, this is John Lively, the chair. I just wanted to disclose that I was raised in Wallowa, and so years ago was a competitor of Elgin, but I have a niece that lives in Union now, so we go back up there quite a bit. We have relatives and friends, so it's a beautiful part of the country, and I appreciate the importance of the volunteer fire department. So thanks a lot.
Okay. Appreciate the opportunity to address this.
You bet.
All right. Bye.
Bye. So before we close, I will just so since I was raised in northeastern Oregon, and my father was the volunteer fire chief and the mayor and everything else in Wallowa, since there was only 800 people and you had to do multiple things, but I'm very familiar with volunteer fire departments. My great uncle was the fire chief in Echo, and for years when I'd spend the summers in Echo, would watch him and his volunteers respond to, there they'd have wheat fires and all kinds of problems they had to respond to. So I'm very familiar with both the need and the value that that is provided by the volunteer fire department. So hopefully we're able to do something to help out. Representative Huffman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to apologize and make known to everybody. Please forgive the frivolity. We do that to keep our sanity sometimes, but I didn't want to diminish the importance of the bill. I wanted to explain that very supportive and appreciate you being here, and sometimes I get a little carried away.
Did you get carried away while I was gone?
Yes, I did.
So I'm going to close the public hearings on 2818 and 3189. And again, thank you all for taking the time. And I'll just echo what Representative Huffman said. We kid amongst ourselves and do that, but this is very serious. We're very supportive. My intent will be as the chair that as soon as the paperwork is ready to hold a work session, which is the next step in being able to move the bills. And again, we will be working to request of the speaker to remove any referral to revenue. We'll see what we can do on that. Okay, thanks again for being here. Okay.
We can open a work session. I'll just give a summary of 3020.
You mean a public hearing?
We're going to do 3029? 3029?
Yeah, who's chair of this committee anyway?
Just curious. We're just bossy from the minority party.
You were just being